it is Reese here, and thank you for joining me for another video, another reaction video taking us back to the world of what culture. And today I'm reacting to this piece, 20 Wild Horror Movie Casting Choices We Almost Got. Um, I don't really know what commentary I'm going to offer here. I was sent this and asked to react to it, and I think it'd be interesting to I think about almost sort of hypotheticals, what might have been, to enter the world of sort of unmade studies and picture what some of these films may have looked like with different people. Of course, the case, would any of them have been better? Maybe some of the choices will be shocking ones that we can't believe we missed out on. Who knows? Anyway, this is a piece by Jack Pooley. I've linked it in the comment. I've linked it in the description, sorry, below. Normally, let's have a look at some of the horror films we could have seen. Excuse me. And it would be interesting as well to think about kind of the production dimension of why these castings didn't happen as well, if we get that information. Let's have a look. 20. And Meryl Streep as Ellen Ripley, and the role of Sigourney Weaver. Scott had a okay, so he sort of wanted Meryl Streep. Ridley Scott wanted Meryl Streep. Never made contact with her due to the passing of her partner, and so a wider casting call led to Sigourney Weaver. And I'm going to say something I think it's sort of sacrilegious in film commentary, but I don't really like Meryl Streep particularly. I've sort of never found her a particularly engaging presence on screen. Um, she's been in good films, but I've always found her to be sorry, this is very controversial. A little bit of sort of an over actor, as it were. You can almost sort of see the acting happening in a way that I sort of don't see with actors. So I'm very glad this one did not come to happen. And of course, in Ripley as Sigourney Weaver, we have one of the sort of most iconic sort of sci-fi and horror characters, female characters ever put to screen. So different. Al Pacino as Hannibal Lecter. Goodness, imagine. And he was one of the people. Sean Connery as well, according to this. It'd be interesting. That would be a. It'd be interesting to see that one. It's fascinating to watch Silence of the Lambs now. Is that the Hopkins performance is really very, very restrained, very controlled, and some sequences, the sequence in the cage, for example, that are not, that are somewhat sort of more elaborate. Broadly, Hannibal Lecter is a very sort of controlled, restrained character. With Al Pacino being where he was at this point and where he's gone on to be, I cannot, I can't imagine what that would have looked like in the slightest. Let's go ahead. Zac Efron as AJ in Barbarian. So this is a role that was Justin Long. He is the person who sort of owns the house and will sort of lets out the house, and this sort of dodgy character, and who famously, when he discovers the basement in one sequence, decides to sort of chart it and figure out the floor space. Um, so Craig went to Zac Efron and then sort of changed the idea of the part. The character, sorry, once Efron turned him down. The Tom Hanks kind of guy. I can see that. I can see that. So, I mean, Efron is not inherently an unlikable actor or character anyhow. But having someone who's sort of may potentially be very sort of disarming. I can agree with that. I can agree with that. I think that is a case of sort of I don't think it would have been a bad casting, but it would have been a different one. Um, and Jessica Walter as Chucky. Really? Goodness. Yeah. Wow. I see. So okay. So Jessica Walter was originally going to voice the Chucky doll. That feels like that would have been too confusing just to have a different actor. It says here that the so it's sort of born out of a kind of expediency in which Brad Dourif was always going to do both, and then was temporarily unavailable. Um, and then sort of been when Dourif became available. That is the right choice, right? Absolutely the right choice. That would have been confusing, and of course we'd have been deprived of sort of the glory of Doris' performances throughout the franchise. So fascinating one. Christopher Lee as Dr. Loomis. So this was the one that was the banner image of the article. This would have been fascinating. This would have been very, very fascinating. Um, I would be very, very intrigued to see what that film would have looked like. Because these are both sort of actors of sort of considerable stature. Um, it would have been interesting to have seen what would have happened to the Halloween franchise. So my view, as I've discussed it in another video, is that the franchise really would have been better to focus on Loomis rather than Laurie for as long as it does. And it keeps going back to Laurie, and because there's only so much that can be done with it. And I wonder if you had an actor of Christopher Lee stature, not to imply Donald Pleasance's stature, is sort of markedly lower, but Donald Lee stature, would that have changed the franchise that way? That would have been very, very interesting. So there, Lee said turning down Halloween was the biggest regret of his career. And it would have been an interesting. I'd have been very, very intrigued to see that film. Alicia Silverstone as Casey Becker in Scream. Okay, so um the same logic of we want a big name star that's going to make it through so we can kill them and be surprising. And I see that. Of course, Barrymore was originally attached to play Sydney, but then essentially said that she shouldn't, that she should be the opening kill. And it is sort of the most iconic horror sequences, openings, or maybe film openings generally. As I talked about in a recent video on movie openings. In that it's so iconic, it's hard to picture that elsewhere, even if it would have been effectively the same sort of logic. The interesting thing here, though, was if that had gone through, that would have likely meant Barrymore would have been Sidney Prescott. Wow, that's an interesting alternate timeline. Um, Dick Van Dyke as Robert Thorne in the open. Wow, wow, that's fantastic. Um, okay, so I reached out to Dick Van Dyke as the sort of, and Van Dyke thought it was off-brand. So in his later career, Van Dyke would play some villains. He was the photographer Paul Galesko in Columbo Negative Reaction. That is a glorious, glorious is it Negative Reaction? The photo one. Um but yes, it that would be a fascinating one as well. And again, this might be a case of Star Image working against as well. Um because Peck had played complex roles. He'd been sort of this figure in horror things, Cape Fear. Um there hadn't been too much of that for Dick Van Dyke at this point in his career. That would have been an interesting about face. Um, whether it would have been particularly believable or not, although we've seen him play villains elsewhere, so maybe so. Maybe so. Jamie Lee Curtis as Regan in The Exorcist. Um, yeah. Um, so this is properly cementing Jamie Lee Curtis's name in horror, right? If she was going to be in The Exorcist. Um, it says here that Janet Lee, Curtis's mother, refused to let her audition for the part. Um, I think it's a story of a mother sort of looking after a child. Wonderful, and this was a very complex role for a child performer. And given the way that Curtis's career has gone since, um, a wonderful role, wealth of roles in Disney and horror, and into an Oscar that slightly tenuous about whether she deserved it for the film she got. Um, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to think that it's landed too badly for her. Is what I'll say. And Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst as Alex and Claire in Final Destination. Wow, and it's fantastic that that was lobbied as well before. They were sort of cast together as Spider in the Spider-Man films. That's fascinating. Um, so it was lobbied. The writer lobbied for them, but they just sort of didn't have the clout, as it were. Be a fascinating thing to see. Again, sort of the sort of what ifs of would they have had Spider-Man in that way or not. I think the Devon Sawa's performance of this and Ali Larter in this one, less so the second one, they're really, really compelling. I've been again fascinating alternate timeline, but this would be a case of them would we have lost Tobey Maguire for Spider-Man, and that as he's my favourite Spider-Man, would have been a very, very upsetting world. Um, Terence Stamp as John Ryder in The Hitcher. So I'm going to be honest, I have not seen The Hitcher. It's one of those horror films that I've never quite got to. I believe there's two of them as well, a sequel and a remake, if I remember right. Um, Terence Stamp's sort of incredible performance in Superman and as a villain. It's hard for me to comment here in that I've not seen the film, so I'm going to skip by this one. I will watch it at some point, I promise. Sarah Michelle Gellar as Alice in Resident Evil. So Gellar is sort of the essentially kind of one of the horror hit girls at the moment after Buffy, after I Know What You Did Last Summer. This is a period she's probably been in Scream 2 or filming it around this time as well. And it says he's turned down the role due to brief nudity requirements in the film. Which is fair enough, fair enough. That is a fair reason. The way the franchise went, and again, Jovovich has been one of the better points in a franchise, I think. That kind of, I think you can turn it off and enjoy it as brainless, as mindless entertainment. I think that's the way to appreciate it, rather than sort of being a Resident Evil fan who's going to get particularly upset about sort of all the shifts and breaks and that with canon and lore and stuff. And again, sort of the connection between Jovovich and Anderson in the end, and that story's not happening elsewhere, is it? Tom Hanks is Jacob Singer and Jacob's Ladder. That's interesting. So this is a period where Tom Hanks' star image is kind of still being consolidated. He appears in stuff like Bonfire of the Vanities, slightly later on in early 2000s in The Lady Killers, and sort of these roles that are not sort of nice, fun roles. Road to Perdition, in which he's excellent, but it's kind of a very step away from his star image. And it is a case of, you feel like given what the role demanded, Hanks would not have been the fit for it. And quite a gear shift. Of course, he says, he appeared in Bonfire of the Vanities, and that was also a bit of a sort of critical bomb regarding Hanks's performance. Again, a case of star image here, I think, powering it. Bette Midler was Annie Wilkes in Misery. I want to do the thing on The Simpsons. Oh no, Bette Midler. And this is sort of Kathy Bates and Annie is one of the iconic horror performances, Oscar-winning performance. Bette Midler, I've only ever seen in one sort of horror kind of adjacent role, which is in Hocus Pocus, in which she's sort of having come the camp of it. It's hard to picture her in this sort of dead serious role, and it says here that she turned it down, and down to the amount of violence as well. She sort of didn't picture herself in this. And if you can't see yourself in it, that probably sort of says all you need to know, right? These are fascinating. I wasn't aware of some of these. This is really, Sammy Davis Jr. is Beetlejuice again. Pictured Davis Jr. Yeah, I mean, Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton is an actor who I love, who I think is sort of criminally underrated. Amazed he's sort of not won an Oscar because he is incredible. And I would, yeah, sort of say that Samuel Davis Jr. is envisaged in part because the character is sort of aligning into kind of racialized roots of the character. Should have been interesting, but again, this is one of those roles that feels, how can I say, feels almost kind of as if you had the only actor who could have done it in the cast. Sort of, we saw Beetlejuice when it came out a few years ago now, and that Keaton fit into a role like glove. Sort of course, we wouldn't have got all these sort of fantastic Keaton Burton collaborations if this had happened. We'd lost Batman, we'd have lost as well. So this, like Samuel Davis Jr. And I'm glad this one did not come to pass. Tilda Swinton as Pennywise. That is fascinating. Yeah, I'm trying to picture it. And this is scheduling details. She wasn't available, so that didn't happen. I can't picture that at all. I may be missing something. I may very much be missing it, but I cannot picture her in this role. I've sort of seen her in as sort of these evil characters in Suspiria, and then never was fully on board with it. And so picturing her as this sort of terrifying clown is not something I can imagine. Um, yeah, no, that one's thrown me. I can't quite picture it. Truth. Chris Evans as Danny in Doctor Sleep. Um, this is so offensive in the piece. Evans is an actor with enough range and nuance to play such a complex character. And would have felt like a little like studio encouraged casting. I think that's probably a fair description. I mean, Evans, yeah, I think Doctor Sleep is glorious. Again, a fantastic film. Highly, highly recommended if you haven't seen. And McGregor is fantastic. It's a fantastic cast. Rebecca Ferguson as well is terrifying as Rose the Hat. There's a sequence sort of in the center, in the middle of the film. That's one of the few scenes that I ever sat in the cinema and felt incredibly uncomfortable about watching. If you've seen the film, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Um, yeah, it feels like it is sort of the film would have absolutely done better commercially than it did. Not saying it did bad, but it would have done absolutely better. This is the sort of peak of kind of Avengers time. But yeah, again, talked about Sally Field as Alice in Friday the 13th. Again, fascinating. Um, yeah, it's fascinating that sort of a film made on a budget like this would be looking to someone who was sort of so known and so expensive. Um, I can't quite picture Sally Field based on I can't quite picture her in a horror in a role like this, which again sort of perhaps a controversy, but the original Friday the 13th is not that good. It's really boring and meanders, and I think the remake in 2009 is markedly better. It's hard to picture what she would bring to a role that is essentially kind of a nothing role, really. And I don't want to not Adrian King, but I feel like a lot of people could have done this role because there's not much to be done with it. Is that unfair to say? Um, that's what I've said. That is what I've said. River Phoenix as Daniel Malloy in Interview with the Vampire. Again, one that I've not seen. And the reason here is the reason here that it was recast was that Phoenix died very prematurely of drug overdose. Um, so sort of the changing casting was mandated by sort of the loss of the actor. Um, I like here an emergency replacement actor who donated his entire salary to some of Phoenix's favorite charitable organizations. I like that. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Um, Christian Slater is excellent. I haven't seen the film. I'm sure he's excellent in the film. Um, it is. I mean, this is a sort of reflection on sort of a life that was lost too soon. And to Jenna Ortega as Charlie in Hereditary, so sort of the horror it girl at the moment. Um, yeah, it's tough to see her disappearing into someone like Charlie. Um, Hereditary and Millie Shapiro is excellent in the film, and obviously we know where it goes. Um, Jenna Ortega, again, sort of is a very different screen presence. I say that not as a negative, but she's a very different screen presence. And I don't think we've fitted the demands of this role. Um, let's get to a bit of a period now, sort of Jenna Ortega oversaturation, I think. Um, I love horror. Um, she's appearing in like every other film. Perhaps less so now, but there was that sort of peak period where I thought she was in everything. To have seen her appear in something else as well, I'm happy we didn't, just for my own sanity. So number one, what is the number one pick here? This will be interesting. Of course, we need to actually click on the thing for it to work. Simon Pegg's spoon in Dog Soldiers. Um, yeah, it's Dog Soldiers. Um, it's here that so I didn't go for it. He sought for his guns because Edgar Wright told him that he was going to make Shaun of the Dead his first proper movie role. Um, I like that. I like that. I can picture Peg in the film. It's a wonderful British werewolf film. Um, but I can picture him in it. But again, sort of his career where it's gone from Shaun of the Dead, it feels. I don't think he'll begrudge having lost the role here. So there we go. So that is 20 casting. I didn't know many of these. This is fascinating to look at. I love stuff like this. I love these kind of historiographies and unmade films and those sorts of briefing notes, demos, all that sort of stuff. I love that. So if you know stuff like that, please send them my way. I love those things. I Did you know many of these? Are there any other casting choices you would talk about that you didn't see here? I'd love to hear them. So comment below and share them. As I say, I love this kind of unmade logic. And if it's of interest, I did a paper a few years ago on the Candyman franchise and kind of unmade films there and sort of what these might have looked like. And I can re-record that and upload it here if that would be of interest. And stop running. Thank you so much for watching this one. And make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, ring the bell so you know when a new video is coming. Thank you so much for watching. I'll look forward to seeing you all in the next one.